Welcome to the Ringling. My name is Katie Nickel. I'm the head of educational programs here at the museum. We're going to start today's program with a land acknowledgement statement. The Ringling acknowledges that its campus and grounds are located on the ancestral and traditional homelands of the Seminole Tribe of Florida, the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida, and the ancient Calusa, Ujita, and Tocobaga peoples. We pay respect to the resiliency of their tribal members, past and present, and to all indigenous peoples. The Ringling and the Florida State University honor its friendship with the Seminole Tribe of Florida, together paying tribute to the tribe's great history and rich culture. We encourage all to learn about the significance of indigenous peoples in this region and throughout the United States. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Katie, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Ringling today for a wonderful and exciting lecture from an artist, Lorna Bieber, who is with us today, and her exhibition has just opened this morning downstairs in the Montage Gallery, and I encourage you all to visit it following the lecture. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the curator of Lorna Bieber Natural World, which is Christopher Jones. Christopher Jones is the Stanton B and Nancy W. Kaplan Curator of Photography and Media Arts. Hi, Christopher.
Hi, thank you so much, Katie, and thank all of you for coming out this morning. I'm always heartened to see the support that the community has for contemporary art and artists here, and all your support for the museum, so thank you so much for joining us. It's a really extra special pleasure for me to introduce you to our exhibiting artist, Lorna Bieber, whose solo exhibition, Natural World, is opening today in our Keith D. and Linda L. Monda Gallery for Contemporary Art, and that's right downstairs. I know some of you might have gotten a sneak peek. If not, directly after this talk, please go downstairs to see the exhibition. You're going to be floored. This morning, Lorna will be discussing the origins and development of her artistic practice and process for creating her mammoth montage works, two of which are being shown for the very first time anywhere as part of this exhibition, so that's very exciting. But a little bit about Lorna, her backstory. She was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but lives and works in New York City. She is a mixed media artist, I would say, whose working method includes collage, paint, copier, and computer technology, as well as traditional and non-traditional photographic techniques. Her work has been shown in many prominent institutions. She's had solo exhibitions at the George Eastman Museum, Mount Holyoke College Art Museum, Addison Gallery of American Art, Hyde Collection, and Houston Center for Photography. And her work has been exhibited also at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Brooklyn Museum of Art, Smithsonian American Art Museum, Fogg Art Museum, MFA Houston, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, MoMA PS1, and the Norton Museum as well. And her work is also kept in many of those collections. She's been a fellow or artist in residence at the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Center, at the Addison Gallery of American Art, and at McDowell in Petersburg, New Hampshire, the Santa Fe Art Institute, and the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and others. Just on a personal note, it really means a lot. It's dear to me to introduce Lorna to you. I've been working with her for about 5 years now. We've been talking about doing some sort of exhibition that has been sort of on this permanent suspended hiatus because of COVID and all sorts of things going on, right? And so it feels a little unreal to be finally introducing her work to you all and introducing you to her to you all. And I just want to say that, working with Lorna has been so enriching for me personally. Her, experiencing the world through her eyes and perspective, the sort of sense of wonder and awe that she keeps, and her openness to the people and experiences around her have just really been illuminating for me. And I hope that they are equally enriching for you all as you hear her talk about her work and experience it downstairs. Anyway, without further ado, please welcome Lorna Bieber.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Chris. That was such a lovely introduction, and I have to say that it's been a joy to work with Chris. He's given me new insights into my work, and we have wonderful conversations, He's a kind and generous and very, very brilliant curator, and I feel fortunate to work with him. And I'm so happy to see all your faces here. I've been looking forward to sharing my work with you and talking with you about my work. I'm going to start when I was 5 years old, but don't worry, we're not going to take it year by year. But I didn't realize until I was, I guess, in college that not everybody knew what they wanted to be from the time practically they were born or conscious. And I was just a very, very lucky little girl. Not only did I know I wanted to be an artist, I was supported by my family and our neighbors and our friends. We had people around us who were also artists, so it seemed like a very, very natural thing for me. I also had an amazing high school art teacher. His name was Mr. Ferrara, and I like to mention him at every lecture because he took art seriously, he took us seriously. It was kind of curious because he was also the football coach. But when he walked into his class, the first thing he said was, anybody who's here for an easy C, get out now. And better than any teacher I had in college. He was just amazing. And wonderful as all this was, I had some struggles because I hated the blank page. And once I figured out what I wanted to draw or paint, I always wanted to try every variation. If there was a red flower, I wondered how it would look as a blue flower, or it should be on the left or would it be on the right. And I just was paralyzed. I had so many choices. At that time, there was no computer, and there really wasn't even a copier. So I couldn't do all these variations, and I was not very technically adept, so I couldn't do printmaking or get a camera. So I wasn't having as joyful as experiences as I should have. And I went to college, majored in art, and then like all artists, when I graduated, I had to get a job because you just don't make any money as an artist. And I had the good fortune to be artist in residence, as Chris mentioned, at the Addison Gallery of American Art, which is Fuller's Academy in Andover, and also at Mount Holyoke and Reed College. And I talked to the art students there, and I say, you know, be prepared. When you graduate, you're going to have a job, but don't despair. You don't know what might happen through that job. And one of the best things that ever happened to me was going to work for Newsweek magazine. They had, I was in the art department, they had an in-house lab at that time, and they had staff, dedicated photographers. At the end of each week, there would be a pile of photographs, I mean literally this high, black and white photographs that they would be throwing out. My brother and I were very close. We got Newsweek magazine. We got, you know, Time, Life, Look, Newsweek. And what we would do when my parents were done with them is we would erase the eyeballs and we would add, you know, a different kind of mouth. And I thought, now I've got the original. I'm going to do this on the original and send it to him. At the time, I was doing drawings, very simple line drawings, and the heads were happy face heads. I was just so intrigued with happy faces. So I took the black and white photos from Newsweek, and that was probably an in-house picture of the cafeteria, and I put these happy faces on. And I was electrified. They were funny, but they were scary. They were real because they were photographs, but they weren't real. And it just turned out to be an absolutely defining moment of my career. It just stunned me how this simple act could make something so startling and new. And it was like a door opened and I knew this is how I was meant to work. And I realized I had been running a race with my shoelaces tied, and suddenly I felt so free and so liberated. What inspired me visually was not the real world, but images of the real world. The other thing that Newsweek had, which was kind of amazing, was a $40,000 color copier. And this was such a novel thing at that time that they gathered the entire staff together and said, we're going to give you a demonstration. And I remember the guy from the copier company saying, here's the original, and now I'm going to make a copy. And then he shuffled them on his back and said, which is the real one and which is the copy? And we were like, ooh, because we couldn't tell. I mean, it was really a big, big deal. And I thought, I'm going to use this copier after hours when nobody was around. And I grabbed pictures from the lab and from magazines and from anywhere I could find it, and I would have 40 copies of the same image, and then I would try different heads. I had, actually, Chris, if you can, yeah. I made this whole vocabulary of heads, different sizes, and with a copier I could make them really large, really small. I could flip them, so they'd be left to right, flop them. And it was just so exciting. I could try every variation on a theme. My indecisiveness vanished, and the work was just pouring out. And this, So, the simple happy face obviously evolved, and there's some more complex vocabulary of heads, and I started to draw sometimes directly on the image. And after about 3 or 4 years, I had taken this as far as I could go, and I started to work exclusively in black and white, still with found images. This is an original image from a book about God knows what. I don't know if it was architecture or landscaping or something. But, and I think if you go to the next slide, this is what it became through my copier intervention. So I wasn't doing color, but I was altering and distorting it on the Xerox machine. And I then took the final Xeroxes, and remember, I had no background in photography, and I took it to a commercial lab to have it printed. The Metropolitan Museum of Art at that time had a very small photography department, but a really wonderful woman who was the head of it. She kind of changed a lot of things in that museum in terms of photography, Maria Hamburg. And they had, once a month, an open portfolio. You could drop your portfolio off, and when I dropped it off, the woman at the desk said, don't expect any feedback. We're just doing this for our purposes. We want to see what's out there, but we're just going to hand you your portfolio back without a word. So a month later, I went to pick up my portfolio, and it wasn't there, and the woman said, Maria Hamburg wants to meet you. And she brought me back there, and Maria sat me down, and she just started talking to me. She was so respectful. As I said, I was printing these black and white things at a commercial lab. They were coming out really crappy, basically. And she so respectfully said, did you mean for this to be kind of tinged with green? And what do you want this to look like? And I gave her some convoluted, wacky answer. I said, well, I want it to be like if images were projected into outer space and then a satellite captured them and then it was projected back. And she said, well, just sit down. I'm going to bring out a lot of different photographs in our collection, and you tell me if this is what you want it to look like. And she brought out a lot of different, beautiful, beautiful photographs, valuable photographs. And she brought out a William Klein, and I said, that's it. That's the look I want. And she turned to her assistant, Jeff Rosenheim, who's now the head of the department. He succeeded her. And she said, Jeff, who is that wonderful printer, Chuck Kelton? I think we should put Lorna in touch with Chuck Kelton. She shouldn't be going through commercial labs. And this was such a gift. He was printing Helen Levitt's work, Danny Lyon's work, Mary Ellen Mark's work. He also was doing a lot of celebrities. They went to him like Linda McCartney. And Maria said, call him up, tell him, you know, that I sent you. But again, we don't know that he's going to be willing to shoot or work with you. But this was just such a gift. I worked with him for 30 years. He's a dear, dear friend. And not only was he a great printer, and he's a great artist in his own right, but he was not rigid. I mean, I was naive, and I didn't know how so much of what I was doing could really potentially piss off a lot of traditional photographers. And we would print in his darkroom, and his assistants would try to make me do the sort of straight and narrow, and he would say, no, 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 this is what she wants, let's just do it, let's just try it. So at that time, because Chuck only printed in black and white, that's what I did for the next, like, close to 15 years, but we did so many different things that I didn't miss color at all. We were able to print not as big as I wanted to, but we got as large as a doorway. And at that time, it was very unusual to print artwork that size, and we had to send to England, order the paper on a roll from England. It had to come by boat. It took 6 months. Yeah, it was just a very different world back then. And but I was still working with a copier, and I was still working with found images. And Chris and I chose this because one of the pieces, the one on the far left, is actually in the show, but you can see that elements of it were mixed and matched with other backgrounds. And so because the pieces were so big, they wouldn't fit in regular trays. He filled his sinks with chemistry, and that was our tray. And I couldn't take just a regular, you know, size piece of paper and see it come up. They were rolled, and I would just see a little section of it. And but he never, you know, he just fully embraced it. He really, really enjoyed all the things that I was doing. He said, you can do anything in here, but don't touch my lenses. You know, that was. So we finally had a scale that I always wanted, and it was very large for that time, you know, which is 20 plus years ago. It was about the size of a doorway. And one of the things I wanted was for the image to go in and out of focus. I don't know if you can see that well on the slide, but you'll definitely see it downstairs. And each piece that I did was different. So it was an addition, but it was an addition. It was not an addition. And I wanted it to be, I wanted to break up the solid and impenetrable surface so that it became a fragile apparition that could, you know, just dissolve at any moment. I described it to Chuck in my usual way by saying, well, you know, remember Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass? I want it to be like that. I want people to feel that they can walk in to that photograph. So I worked in this manner for about 10 years. And I did several series. I did trees, I did birds, I did portrait busts, I did rooms. Each one took about a year. And, you know, I'm not a photographer, and a lot of the things that I was doing were breaking, you know, the rules of traditional photography. I didn't use a camera. I was appropriating. I was drawing and collaging the pieces. And not only that, when I had a show at Julie Saul, there were so few, I think there were like 2 photography galleries in New York at that time, and she was one of them. I said, Julie, I don't want my work framed. And she said, well, no one will buy them. You know, and I said, I don't care, I don't want them to be framed. And this was so unusual. It was mentioned in the New York Times review. And I just say all this, it's like, it's hard to believe, but it really was very, very different back then. I was just so fortunate to have somebody like Maria and Chuck championing me, and I also did a lot of artist residencies as Chris mentioned. And one of them that's especially dear to my heart is the McDowell Colony. I've been there 6 times, and the last time that I visited, I was working on the Trees series, and when I worked in my studio, I would edit on my tables. I don't have a huge studio, and I didn't have a wall where I could view things, but at McDowell I had a huge empty studio, and I thought, instead of editing on my table, I am going to just fill this wall, which was about 11 feet high, and just go row after row after row, whoops, and then sit down at the end of a week and look and decide, compare, contrast which works, which doesn't work. But a funny thing happened. It was like, suddenly I had the size that I always wished Chuck could print one piece, but instead of it being one piece, it was a multi-part piece. And I was elated, but also a little confused. And the other wonderful thing about McDowell is you have artists, you have writers, you have dancers, and there was a photographer, a real photographer there, and they had a filmmaker, and I said, come and double check this. Am I being delusional, or is this a real thing? Because I really like how it looks, and it's how I want to show my work. And they all said, no, keep going this way. The filmmaker said, I'm going to edit this for you. And I said, no, you're not. But, so it was just an explosion. I remember going into the Colony Hall where you had dinner, and I said to everybody, you're not going to see very much of me, and I apologize, I'm not going to go to your open studios, I'm not going to be going to your presentations. I have hit the mother lode. Not only am I doing the single trees that are going to be blown up really large, but I want to work on this huge multi-part piece. And I've never had another period like that in my life. It was just magical. I mean, I was in there, I only left to go to sleep, and occasionally I'd wander in the woods. And so they were shown like this, as a grid with the white borders all around them. And after Newsweek, I would say this was the second most important happy accident of my career. I called them montages, and I worked that way for about 17 years. And each piece takes about 1 to 2.5 years to do. I had somebody come in my studio once, and they said, oh, do you just, each time you show them, you rearrange them? And I said, absolutely not. It took me forever to figure out the right placement. And besides working, there's thousands of combinations with literally hundreds of images before I get it right, until they settle down and they work in harmony. And people say, well, how do you know when it's done? It's when my eye passes over the whole thing and nothing catches my eye. It's only the mistake, that sort of stops you. And storytelling was always very important to my work and to my life. And I was fascinated by how many storytelling devices this way of working referenced. They're like comic books, movie storyboards, film strips, mosaics, flip books, crazy quilts, frescoes, drive-in movies, because it's so very, very large. And but I'm not interested in telling a straightforward, linear story. I am someone who likes being lost and confused. I watch a movie on an airplane. I will turn off the sound. I like to watch movies in the middle of a movie, so I don't know what's going on. I like silent movies. I like radio dramas. I remember when I was very young, I saw last year at Marienbad. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, but it just jumps all over in time and space, and you're not sure quite what's going on. It was like an early Pulp Fiction in a way. And I remember being so excited watching that. I was in college, and I called my parents, and long distance was expensive then. And I said, I just saw the most amazing movie. And I started to talk about it. My father said, that's really great. Put it in a letter. my dad. I love how these images expand, they contract, there are different points in space and time, and I don't do all this to frustrate the viewer. I just feel like this is a way to involve them, because if something is too easy, then you don't bother looking or feeling. And I knew that as the viewer's eye leapt from image to image, their brain would fill in the gaps. I mean, I really trusted the viewer in that way. And so I worked this way for many years, and it was always in black and white, and it was always a grid. And then after 10 years, I had a show at Mount Holyoke, and John Stomberg, who was then the director, he wasn't trying to tell me what to do. He just sort of casually said, I'm very curious, what would these pieces look like if you got rid of the white border? And I had been working this way for quite a while, so I was kind of intrigued, and I thought, okay, I will try that. And this is what happened. It's Tapestry, it's the piece that's in the show downstairs, and this started as images of a kind of, I thought it was going to be a Midwestern farm. But then I walked through a gallery at the Met Museum. I was going to see another show, I forget which one it was, but they had a tapestry show up. And part of me, half my brain said, keep going, you got an agenda here, and the other half was like, wait a minute, something's happening and you have to stop and explore. I stood in front of this, just 1 square foot of tapestry for about 30 minutes. There was so much going on. And I thought, is this sort of medieval television? Is this what they did? And I went back and I kind of changed it all around, and I was just electrified. And I thought, don't just remove. Yeah, that's how it started out, the previous one. This is what I thought I was going to do, and I guess Chris will run through. There's like a number of iterations. That's what it's like in my studio. Blank spaces and shifting things all around, and you can see how it slowly evolved. I was still hanging onto the grid a little bit, and I forget how many, I think there's several, yeah, until it got to this point. And once I broke through the grid, it was kind of easy to then jump back to color again. And not only that, but technology had caught up with my ineptitude, and there was the iPhone camera, which even I could use. So suddenly I was taking my own pictures, and Ordinary Day and Quiet Night, this is Ordinary Day, I leapt to color. This was my first color piece, and most of the images here were from an iPhone. And this is Quiet Night. And the first one, Ordinary Day, I took pictures whenever I was on a train or a bus going to visit friends who lived out in the country. I was always fascinated by who lived in these houses. And so I just started taking lots and lots and lots of pictures. And this was, I'm from Ohio, but we came to New York for a visit when I was 7. I remember telling my dad, I'm going to remember this moment the rest of my life, and I'm going to live here. I just love this city so much. And during COVID, that's how it started out. During COVID, I just started walking around the city and taking pictures at night. And it felt like old New York. It was, as terrible as COVID was, it was a gift in that way. And so, I start, and the things are rectangular, but that's just to kind of give me a feeling of what imagery I want and what mood, and that's a little bit of my studio in front. I remember telling Chris, at one point working on this, at the very beginning, it was so frustrating, and I worked late at night, so I think it was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and I stood in front of the piece and I just said to the piece, I know you're going to reveal yourself. Why can't you just do it now? You know. So there I am working on the piece in my studio, and so this is how I found my way. It all started at Newsweek with a pile of photos and a copier, and people are always curious how I do my work. It's kind of like when I was little and we went to a crayon factory. You know, it's always fun to see how something is made, and I can relate to that. But how I make my work, I think I've made clear, was purely, necessity being the mother of invention, because it was a workaround to avoid a blank page and having to choose one thing over another, and my technical incompetence. But my goal was not to make something new. That really was never what I was thinking about. I wanted to bring forth images that were always there. I make artificial images that don't exist in our world, but I believe they reside in the depth of our collective consciousness. And what moves me the most is when people look at my work, and this has happened a number of times, and they'll say, I know I've never been to this place, and yet it feels so familiar. And I developed this way of working and this visual language to enable me to express and arouse emotional feelings. And all of my work is about the search for spirituality, which is a word you don't hear much of, and I've even talked to curators about it. It just doesn't seem to be discussed in terms of art anymore, but it is of primary importance to me. And to me, spirituality it's not religion. I have nothing against religion, but that's not what it means to me. It's connecting to the unseen forces that lie beneath the material world, where we stand in awe but don't feel diminished. And art seems a perfect place to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Lorna. That was absolutely wonderful. Do you mind taking a few questions?
Not at all.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I gotta know, what are the little pink and blue squares in the process pictures?
The little pink and blues. Oh, those are Post-its.
Yeah, I know that, but
what do
purpose,
they
use,
say?
what are you doing with them, please?
It tells me that probably at 5 in the morning I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't going to remember it the next day, because it's like, go look at this again.
Makes perfect sense, but you know how one would have to ask, right?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you noticed that. I mean, these really are my day-to-day kind of to remind me, okay, did I make a mistake in moving this or that, or so. And then Chris and I thought, well, it would be fun to share them with people.
Process photos are always so much fun.
They are, yeah, they are.
That was my question too, because I'm looking at these photos, these process photos. I noticed there was like a Post-it note in the same place that was like there for a couple of months, and I'm like, what's this note?
Not slow, sorry.
One can't rush inspiration, and that's where it comes from, I dare say.
I might have just gotten involved in another section, and actually I can answer that. I can answer that question. Probably I worked in that area, and I couldn't make a breakthrough, and so I just knew I had to leave it alone for several weeks and go to another part. And eventually my head would be cleared, and I'd be able to see this anew. That's why.
Question in the back?
You mentioned lack of spirituality in the artistic arena.
Mm-hmm.
Do you wish there was more of it, or there was more of a conversation in that area?
I do, but I want to make it clear, I love all of the art that's happening now. I just wish that there was more of that sort of a discussion or that kind of work that was being shown. I think the art world is so exciting. And when I started, as I said, there was painting, there was sculpture, there was photography, there was printmaking, and there was a stupid hierarchy. Like, why was painting more important than photography? That is just, it's just burst wide open, thank God, you know? So, yes?
You mentioned the inability to get materials, 6 months to get the boat from England.
Yeah.
Versus everything today seems to be either immediate or accessible. How has that altered your creative process? Obviously, things can go much faster, but how do you compare it to when you did the original work?
I'm happy that you can get it faster. It was very, no, it was so frustrating for Chuck and I for 6 months to not be able to do anything. It was just crazy. And yeah, I'm glad that things have changed. The world has really changed. Do you remember that it used to be like, okay, you could only be an abstract expressionist. If you did anything else, that was looked down on. I shared a very large studio space that was divided up, and there must have been 20 people in there. There weren't walls, you just put up your own little like divider. And the woman next to me, very shy, nice woman, and she did portraits. I guess this was in the 70s. I had a woman from ICA in Boston come to see my work, and she offered me a little show. And she drew me close and she whispered in my ear, she said, "That woman is doing portraits. Don't have anything to do with her, or people will not take you seriously." And it was like, what are you talking about? That was just so weird. But people, you know, there were some people who felt that way. Just the way, it was like, how dare you show a photograph that isn't framed, or how dare you, you know, all these, how dare you, how dare you. And this is in the art world where you think anything goes. So, yeah, go figure. I don't know.
The question? Yeah.
I have a question about process. I was lucky enough to, fortunate enough to go downstairs before I came up, and I was looking at your work really closely. I saw no seams, and I saw also, it looked like, do you take the paper photographs and then adhere it to fabric? Because it looked like it was on some type of fabric
Thank you for bringing that up. That's a really important point. What you're seeing here is paper. It's the Xerox. And it's thousands of little pieces of paper. It's collage. But unfortunately, there's no way that I can show that. I adhere it with something that is really, I mean, conservators and curators just hate me for using this putty stuff. But I couldn't work any other way, because this way I can move things, really, really quickly. I have another dear friend who's a fabulous photographer. He shot for me when I was at Business Week and Forbes, and he, you know, this is not creative, but he comes in with all of his equipment. He spent 2 full days shooting, you know, my pieces, and I said, "Brad, be sure that I want people to have the illusion that this is a collage, so don't get rid of any of the shadows, don't get rid of any of the white cut marks and things like that." And then he took 40 shots of each piece, of each of the big, you know, quiet night and ordinary day. And it took him 2 weeks to piece it together and all of that. And then Chuck doesn't do color, but he put me in touch with a fabulous guy. It's a family-owned business, several generations, at Brilliant in Pennsylvania. And he printed the pieces. He sent me a sample. Chuck came over because Chuck knows how to talk his language. And we held up the sample that he did next to the original. We couldn't even tell the difference. You know, the color was so great. So, I really like to acknowledge how lucky I am for someone who doesn't know how to do things technically, to have all these people who are so kind and supportive.